interested. What is the future?
Well, I can tell you right now that the majority of the people on this webinar do have a HEPA filter. It's even 17% each for no and not yet, but I'm looking, and only 3% are not interested.
Great, thank you, Adam. So let's move on to actually the point of this webinar. And this is when we talk about some of these adjunctive devices and Active Pure. What does Active Pure do? I mean, the logic on all of this, we've seen devices that collect, and then while they're collecting in the device, it may have a kill with UVC or whatever. But how do we get true continuous protection? Why don't we get into that? Dr. Burks, do you want to jump in there a bit?
Yeah, thank you. And I know we're getting close to the top of the hour, so I'm going to be very concise. So in my mind, we all know that there's less transmission of disease outdoors. Why is that? Because there's actual oxidating components in our outdoor air generated by the sun and generated outdoors that actually helps kill different pathogens in our air. And so outdoor air is actually quite safe. So NASA was developing technology for the Space Center because talk about a completely closed system where you have to worry about purity of the air and maintaining purity despite all these other experiments you're doing. And so like with dual use technology, NASA had worked on a technology that uses the same harnesses the power of the outdoor air and the sun to generate those exact same kind of what we call oxidative potential molecules, whether it's hydrogen peroxide or free radicals of oxygen or OH itself. And that really works to puncture holes in membranes of viruses, bacteria, and funguses and causes them to be inactivated. And so that's really critical technology. That technology was purchased by ActivePure many years ago, and it's gone through 5 generations of improvement to address all the concerns that anyone may have about the safety, ability to produce and not produce ozone, which is obviously critically important to the company, exploring and ensuring it doesn't produce VOCs or organic compounds in its function, and then doing the hard work of putting together a medical device class 2 application to the FDA. For those of you who have assembled those 600 to 1,000 page documents, understand that the company took safety and efficacy very seriously to create devices that would have utility from medical spaces to the home to actually commercial and private sector spaces to ensure that we all could have that same experience of outdoor air indoor when you couldn't do anything. You couldn't open up all of the windows. I remember in North Dakota, I said to them, CDC says, you need to open the windows. And they looked at me and they were like, it's 8 degrees. They're like, yeah, no, we don't open the windows in North Dakota. So, I mean, every part of the United States is a little bit different. This technology is continuous, FDA approved, has been studied not only in the laboratory, but in real life scenarios. And that was what critically important to me. They go into prisons, they go into schools, they go into commercial real estate buildings, as many of your dental offices are in commercial real estate buildings, and they study that with before ActivePure installation and after ActivePure installation, and look at those microbes that were there before and ensure that they're no longer there afterwards. And I think it's this, anyone who's looking into this, don't just accept what they have on the internet, really find out, are they FDA approved? What kind of certification do they have from California? What kind of certification? Have they taken the effort to prove that their technology is safe and efficient? And I think and effective. And I think what we've all learned through this, and I think the United States did a very good job of ensuring that the tests we utilize were effective and really had good positive predictive value and negative predictive value. It made sure our therapeutics were well studied before they approved them, and has certainly brought us vaccines. And so really study these groups and make sure that they have real life data, not just black box data. And I think that's what ActivePure has done. And that's why I wanted to be associated and work with the company, because we can't always be outside. Hairdressers moved outside. Dentists can't really move outside and see their clients outside. And so it's about making your air as safe as it can be and as safe as outdoor air. And I think that's harnessing the technology that NASA brought to us in a continuous, made specifically for sizing of rooms. And so they do spend a lot of time looking at the rooms that need to be protected. They have induct units, they have room specific units. And then obviously this technology and being class 2 FDA approved was to bring this device to what we talked about at the beginning, hospital rooms with very sick patients that had multi-drug resistant organisms, to protect other patients from those organisms. And so that's the power of this technology. It has been utilized in medical situations. It has been now adapted to both the commercial sector as well as the private sector and into the home sector. And I think really finding what your office needs. I don't think any client is going to accept any longer getting even a cold from being exposed indoors to potential other people's viruses. And I think that has really been a game changer. No one is going to accept getting flu, RSV, certainly not tuberculosis or COVID in indoor settings. And I think that's why we're really interested in what it's going to take to provide safe air.
Gotcha. Hey, I read a couple of things on this. One that I was impressed with is that claim, the FDA claim, apparently is a true claim to kill COVID-19. And I haven't seen that in too many places. But the other thing I realized when I was reading, it also states that it kills viruses, bacteria, and fungi, which is really pretty neat considering it's continuous. It's in the room where you are, and yet it's super safe, like in the space station, which pretty much is a pretty good reason for that. I was also impressed recently. I read that there's one of these devices in every Cleveland clinic operating room, which pretty much states your clinical statement of how effective and how safe it is. So that's sort of like as good as it gets. But then to disturb everybody, just so everybody knows, I'm from the Bronx. They also use this device in Yankee Stadium, but as an equal time, equal opportunity, they also have it for the Texas Rangers. So to that point, there are probably a bunch more questions to come out. Please, please, please feel free to reach out to us. I would tell you that the neat thing on this that really turned me on is when you see those robots with UVC that kills everything. The neat thing is they kill us too. This is the one that's continuous. We can be in the room and we know that it's protecting us, sort of a bubble. I happen to be flying next week. There's a mobile device that's made, and I'm going to have that mobile device right on the plane with me. And likewise, I have a slightly smaller device called the Surface Air, and I'm going to a GPO next week because we have to do some demonstrations for them. And I'm going to have that there as well. So I sort of travel with this. A mask is good. Should definitely have the mask. But I love being surrounded by a bubble that's going to kill the pathogens. So
I think that's what's exciting about the technology is it's adaptable to different situations. So continuous, safe, occupied rooms where you can understand the importance of killing. Not only it's been shown to be effective against MRSA. I mean, it's really bacteria and fungi are more difficult to kill than COVID-19. And so a lot of the studies have been done, and we do measure bacteria pre and post and fungi pre and post with all of these real life experiments that we utilize, because those are more difficult to kill than COVID-19, and certainly important in all of our practices to make sure that they have this level of protection. Cleveland Clinic is studying it to really see whether it takes down their OR intraoperative infections that occur. I think all of us want to decrease iatrogenic infections. I think every physician and every dentist around the world wants to make sure that that doesn't happen. And I think it's about protecting clients in the waiting room, protecting staff in the break room, and protecting everyone when they're actually in the chair and no mask can be worn by the client to really ensure that your air remains safe for everyone.
And Dr. Burks, to your point, it's interesting. They make units that actually will go into the HVAC and can be sized for that. They make units that are pretty big, the size of, say, a large computer for, I don't know, 3,000 square feet, 2,000 square feet. But then they have a desktop model, because that's the one I'm taking on a plane with me. So really, the neat thing on this is it can be anywhere. Today we had a request from a mobile clinic. So they have a whole bunch of RVs, and they want to put one each of these on their RVs. So as you look at it, and you look at this last basic slide, you can see this is how it works. And yet, at the same time, it also has a HEPA filter in it. So you have the ionization, you have the air being sucked in, because remember, without the air exchange, it's not quite as effective. So you're getting all of the parts and pieces that we all want. And to me, that's the winner. Any other
I think
thoughts?
that's really the important piece when Dr. Collins talked about how important it is to have the device work throughout the whole room. And that's why these oxidative molecules that are shot out from the machine and cover the space rapidly and then brought into the HEPA filters. So two actions happening simultaneously, continuously. I'm, of course, in a hotel room, and of course, I have one right now in the hotel room. To really, I just want to make sure always that the spaces that I am in are protected.
Cool. I want to thank everyone. Adam, can we move on to the next slide? So for everybody, as you note, there's a bunch of email addresses on here. I want to thank everybody for attending. Dr. Burks, Dr. Collins, and Henry Schein for putting this out. Please feel free, contact your Schein dental rep, whoever. Questions are wonderful, and the goal on this really was to create more questions. And with those questions, we hope we can give you the answers that will make things safer for you. But please don't hesitate to keep asking questions. We will try to respond to all of them, even after this. Thank you all. Adam, thank you for your help.
Excellent. Thank you. Great content. If you all just have a couple minutes, there were some great questions that did come in that I think would be beneficial to ask. There were a couple questions that came in regarding hypochlorous acid fogging, efficacy, and does fogging the operatory with the acid essentially help to destroy the virus particles in the air?
Dr. Collins, sounds like right up your alley.
Oh, thank you. So if we think about hydrochlorous acid fogging, this is not a continuous technique. It's an episodic technique that is performed by someone wearing appropriate personal protective equipment without other people being in the room. So if you look at the advantages of continuous in terms of continually treating the air and killing microorganisms, depending on what you're using, but certainly in the case of the Active Pure Medical Guarding, you're killing microorganisms, you're not just filtering them. That is a continuous activity that hypochlorous acid is not, or hypochlorous fogging is not. It is intermittent, and it's really, you're trying to get it on surfaces. So if we think the other one that I saw in a hotel room recently was actually one of the disinfectants using an electrostatic sprayer. Well, the reason that an electrostatic sprayer is used is to create a charge so that that fine mist will be drawn very quickly to a surface. Now, if it's being drawn very quickly to a surface and that's the purpose of it, again, you're not getting air decontamination. So I think there are reasons to choose continuous efficacy of an air decontamination product that kills microorganisms, both when they're in the device so that they're not being chucked out, but also in the air.
Cool. Dr. Burks, a question for you. If people have had the vaccine and have had COVID, will they need the booster?
Yeah, that's a great question. So let me tell you about how these variants came to be. So variants came to be in these specific countries, the South African variant, the UK variant, and the Indian variant, after a large percentage of the population had already been infected with the original strain of COVID-19. So it didn't protect them about what we call secondary infection. And so absolutely get the third shot. And in the case of J&J, get a booster to make sure that you're protected through the next 8 months. Now, what is amazing is, remember we talked about prime and boost? The boost can produce an immune response far greater than the original 2 primes did. And that may then be persistent for months and months and months. And so it may be that after this shot, you're protected for a much longer period of time, potentially even years. So that will be actively studied.
That's a good one, and thank you, because that one's come around a lot. Here's another one for you. After doing an aerosol generating procedure, how long does the room have to be vacant to ensure the air is cleared? In addition, how does this work in an open ventilation setup? And I'm assuming we're now talking about Active Pure.
Yeah, so that's a really critical issue. And obviously anesthesia and other worry about this all the time. And it's why, of course, these are being studied at the Cleveland Clinic in the ORs, because these kind of aerosolized clouds that we know get generated, we always knew that they were persistent. Now we know COVID-19 is also an aerosol, it can remain persistent in the air. And so that's why I talked about how important it is to have something that's continuously providing these oxidative molecules out into your environment to be penetrating these membranes of these viruses, bacteria, and fungi. And the great thing is that they don't care. They're not searching out COVID-19, they're searching out any bad pathogen in the air. And so you can have a combination of pathogens, you can have flu, you can have RSV for your pediatric dentistry out there. I know you're watching this RSV outbreak. It's incredibly serious. It's a very serious outbreak because we have 2 years of unprotected children now. And so that virus has twice as many candidates to infect. And so a lot of these respiratory viruses are going to be particularly bad in the fall. And that's why we believe these extra layers of protection, of masking indoors and really working to improve the purity of your air through these oxidative type approaches will be critical.
And again, Dr. Burks, does it create any pressure issue in a closed ventilation system?
That's a great question. And that's the remarkable part of how this honeycomb designed and how it doesn't impede airflow. And so that's why it can be put into any duct without having to have any impact on the actual airflow in the building. And it doesn't impact the airflow, of course, in the individual units. And that's really, you want to make sure when you do anything in your ducts that it's not changing the airflow in your ducts, because we just talked about how critical ventilation is.
And what about, again, another question for you, what about questions on the filters and maintenance for these units?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so the company has worked very hard to look at how long the device functions for and decided it functions without any kind of maintenance for well over a year, but have developed a yearly cycle where you just replace the cell. So the cell that's generating these critical these critical oxidative components should be replaced yearly. So and that's about 1/10 the cost of the original equipment.
Excellent. A
And
couple
it's
of
kind of
questions.
like, those of you done your refrigerator water filter, kind of think of it like that. It's that kind of system.
Well said. Well said. How do you feel the animal infections have been involved here?
What do you mean?
Well, one of the questions that we got discussed, and I'm trying to get up to that question, and it sort of disappeared, but we will answer it off. What we did get a couple of questions on, and I'm going to throw this at Dr. Collins, the value of pretreatment mouth rinses and of zinc lozenges on the basis of prophylaxis.
Okay, so it's a little bit of a complicated answer to that one. Zinc is obviously an antimicrobial agent. I have not seen any data on the efficacy of zinc lozenges as a preventive measure against the virus. So in the absence of that, I would have to say I don't know. I do know that zinc is an antimicrobial agent. In terms of pre-treatment rinses, and I can't see the question now, it's disappeared. But in terms of pre-treatment rinses, I believe the question was, are they effective? So pre-treatment rinses have actually been used, as I'm sure you all know, for many years to reduce microbial load. What they were looking at was specifically bacterial load at the time. However, there is data supporting the use of pre-rinsing to reduce microbial loads in general, not only bacterial loads. You are reducing the load. How effective a contribution it makes is going to depend on the situation. It's going to depend on what you're using. It's going to depend on what you used. It's also going to be initially reducing the microbial load. However, if you think about long procedures, you do continue to salivate usually, and so there are still microbes that are coming into the mouth after you have pre-rinse. It's certainly one leg in the armamentarium of reducing bacterial load, with the ultimate objective, of course, of reducing contaminated aerosols from developing in the air. You can't prevent them completely. There are aerosols in the air with contamination if you're performing aerosol generating procedures. But let's not forget, if you speak, if you shout, if you cough, if you talk, if you sneeze, and I usually say, or if you sing, but who does that in the dental office? So they all produce contaminated aerosols. If I can go back for a second to when you were talking, Dr. Burks, about the continuous nature of it and the efficacy. The other aspect, when we were asked the question, how long do you have to wait? Otherwise, if you're in a room, how long do you have to wait after an aerosol generating procedure? Well, I know we used to be worried about 10 minutes at one point when some of the disinfectant products for surfaces took 5 and 10 minutes. There are plenty of options that are faster now. That was operatory turnover. This situation, there were areas where they were saying it's 50 minutes, it's 30 minutes. Overseas, in some places, it was 2 hours and longer. That's really an impractical way to run a dental office or actually any healthcare setting. So the other advantage of continuously decontaminating is you're minimizing the level of pathogen, not only SARS-CoV-2, but pathogens in general on a continuous basis. So I think that's one of the other practicalities of continuous versus intermittent.
And Dr. Collins, I read also that assuming that you're gone for the weekend, you don't turn the unit on, question came up, well, how long would it take? Approximately a max of about 30 minutes for the typical operatory, assuming that it's sized appropriately. And there you go. And the other part that's really great, because it's continuous, we have patients and staff constantly walking in and out of our operatories. How nice to know that it's a continuous bubble as well.
Yep.
Again, I thank everybody for their questions. Please feel free to email them to any one of the contacts. And again, Dr. Burks, Dr. Collins, Thank you. Active Pure, great stuff. Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you to all three of you for the great information. Like Dr. Cohen said, if anyone has questions that we were unable to answer, please feel free to reach out to any of those email addresses shown on screen. Tonight's webinar was recorded, so we'll get that out to you guys in the next week or so. With that, we are done. So thank you all for attending, and